Welcome to the Manna at the Tap, a podcast of Tapestry Ministries. It is Tuesday, January the 28th, 2025. The podcast is a daily Bible reading from the Revised Common Lectionary. The Tapestry community calls the reading the manna we explore together. It is the spiritual nourishment our souls crave and the sustenance we need to nurture our spiritual growth. I'm Gloria, a fellow traveler with you on this spiritual journey, and together we can share insights and interpretations from the daily biblical lectionary reading, which will enrich our spiritual lives. Today's lectionary reading comes from the New Testament book of Second Corinthians, which is part of a series of letters written by the Apostle Paul addressing the fractured relationships between the community and him. The letter addresses his previous correspondence with the community. Writing that letter proved challenging for him, and reading it was just as difficult for the community as it brought them to tears. You see, when Paul had visited the community before, there was an exchange of sharp words between the two sides. The relationship was strained, and the community felt hurt. What Paul did not want was for them to remain in conflict and for this to set the tone for their relationship moving forward. In the opening verses of Second Corinthians chapter 1, Paul extended God's grace and peace to the community. He praises God as the Father of compassion and the God of all comfort. The community at Corinth required God's compassion and comfort during this time of conflict. They were not alone. God was in the midst of the mess and the mix to help them mend their fractured relationship and foster reconciliation. Excuse me there. Reconciliation starts with forgiveness. But let me clarify this statement from the outset. Saying I forgive you is easy, but meaning it is another matter entirely. Holding on to not forgiving can gnaw at us. And Paul encouraged the community to identify what they were forgiving to initiate the process. After one identifies what they're forgiving, the next step was to release themselves from the naming and blaming. They needed to take responsibility only for their action and to let go of what had been done to them in their thoughts and behavior, and to remind themselves that God had forgiven them and wanted them to first of all forgive themselves so they could forgive others. Let me just go over that process again. What we need to do is to take responsibility for our own actions. And then what we have to do is to let go of what has been done to us, and we have to let go of it in our thinking and in our behavior. And then we're to remind ourselves, that's when the thoughts come back about what has been done to us. We are to remind ourselves that God has forgiven us, and He wants us to, first of all, forgive ourselves so that we can forgive others. Only God's power can heal the pain we cause one another. Only God's power can heal the pain we cause one another. To forgive ourselves, we must fill our minds with praise and gratitude for the forgiveness that God in Christ Jesus has bestowed on us. The section of the text designated as the lectionary reading for today is 2 Corinthians chapter 7, verses 2 to 12. The community in Corinth held a negative perspective of Paul and his ministry, which influenced their view of him. They had been infiltrated by outsiders who opposed the message of the gospel that Paul was teaching, and they spoke unkindly about him. Paul urged the community to reconsider their perception of him because he longed for the healing of their fractured relationship. It was in a previous letter that Paul had confronted the community about their attitude. By the way, we have no record of this letter, but we know that it's there because he mentioned it in the first of First Corinthians. And he now is pleased that he wrote that letter. He sent one of his associates, Titus, back to Corinth to see what was going on in the community. And Titus brought back a positive message from the community. They were even looking forward to seeing Paul again. The community had changed, and Paul recognized the fruits of their willingness to receive God's forgiveness for themselves and to forgive Paul, expressing a desire for reconciliation. The broken relationship caused them distress, which in turn led them back to God, guiding them back toward salvation. The community ensured that the fractured relationship did not create a divide between God and themselves, thus preventing them from having regrets for living a life of being separated from each other. This also spared them from dying with a sense of remorse over what could have been. Instead, the community rejoiced in the wonderful way the distress brought them closer to God. They felt more alive, concerned, sensitive, human, and responsible. The community emerged from their struggle with purity of heart. We are flawed humans, but God has invited us to walk in faith toward Him when we feel we have failed. Don't dwell on why you have failed. The answer is simple. You are a human in need of a loving God who is present with you in the struggles of life. Your shortcomings can challenge you, but they do not challenge God. He has already provided a solution for us to mend our broken relationships. This allows us to direct our attention outside of the lectionary reading to understand the direction that God has already provided. Let's take a look at 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verses 17 to 19. And by the way, this is my translation of the text. When you are in a relationship with Christ, you no longer think as the world does. It is an entirely new world. The old has passed away, and suddenly everything feels new. All this comes from God. Through Christ, God reconciled us to himself. God can help bring peace between ourselves and others. In Christ, God does not hold people captive for their sins. Why? He forgives us so that we can forgive ourselves. And then, with that same forgiveness, we can forgive others. Today, I hope you will find peace with God so that you can, through God's power, find peace within yourself and with others.